Okay, so, right, introducing our presentation for the second time. My background, just going through the slides, so they're in this recording as well, just in case. And then our goals, right? I don't know where it broke off, but basically, again, what are toxic relationships? Why did they happen? How can we identify if we're currently in a toxic relationship? What are some of the physical and psychological impacts of being in these relationships? What can we do if we are in a toxic relationship? And then what can we do if a loved one is in a toxic relationship? And I think this one is also very important because, you know, you're all studying to be doctors, and you may find that either some of your patients or even coworkers, colleagues, may be involved in some of these toxic relationships, or you might know someone like right off the bat that you're like, I know that what is happening here is not healthy. So I would love to share with you all some options as to how can we provide support to people who may find themselves in these relationships. Okay. So first of all, what do I mean when I say when I mention toxic relationships? So when we talk about toxic relationships, I usually envision that it refers to a partnership in which one or both parts systematically, either consciously or unconsciously, look to hurt and diminish the other person, regardless of the consequences, right? And so when we talk about relationships in general, of course, there are going to be things that are going to be unhealthy, and even the healthiest relationship, right? No one's perfect. And maybe you will look at some of the things I'll go over in the presentation and you'll be like, oh my God, that's like, I've totally done that. And this is not a place of judgment right now, because something that I tell to a lot of my clients and people who reach out to me in social media is that a lot of us didn't have the privilege of being taught how to relate in a healthy manner, or to understand what happens in our relationships, our cultures, beliefs, gender, sexual orientation impacts the way that we relate to other people. So this is a space to maybe like notice a couple of things and say, okay, maybe this is something that I can start changing, or that I need to start thinking about. But what I mainly focus is that if you're in a relationship that has these elements consistently, and that the person, again, it's not a one-time thing. It's not, you know, we had a fight and one particular unhealthy dynamic came up. It's consistently throughout the relationship, these behaviors come up, and your well-being or the other person's well-being, it's significantly impacted because of these behaviors, experiences, etc. Another important thing are that toxic relationships are genderless. It doesn't matter how you identify in the gender spectrum, you can be part of a toxic relationship. In the Dominican Republic culture, there is a lot of experiences around women being in toxic relationships. You know, individuals who identify as women being in heterosexual relationships mostly, and experiencing a lot of these toxic patterns. However, anyone can experience toxicity in their relationships. And I think this is something important to bring up, because again, it can happen in all types of partnerships, with all types of sexual orientation, with partners who identify with, you know, any particular gender, or they're non-binary. It doesn't matter. Don't let culture make you question what you are experiencing. And I think that is something that I really wanted to bring up, because especially for individuals, again, I'm speaking for my culture, I can't speak for all cultures, but in the Dominican Republic, there's a lot of experiences that men cannot be part of toxic relationships. Men cannot experience, you know, violence from their female partner, especially if they are in a heterosexual relationship. So I always love to bring this up because it creates a lot of shame for individuals who identify as men who are in heterosexual relationships to be able to say, oh, you know, I experienced this. And then being met with a society that a lot of its members say, oh, then that means that you're not man enough, or we don't believe you. It can't be like that. Oh, you know that women are X, Y, or Z. And I just want to, you know, reiterate the, you know, importance that your story is your story, and that, again, you can experience this regardless of how you identify. Okay. So how can violence look like, right? Because violence, a lot of people, when we talk about toxic relationships, they say, okay, so my partner doesn't ever get physical with me. So, you know, I don't know if I really am in a toxic relationship because they have never laid a hand on me. And what I wanted to bring up today is that violence can look in very different ways. We're gonna cover very specific ways, like how it can come up, like economically, sexually, if there are kids involved. But today I just wanted to bring up some of the ways in which, you know, violence can come up in the way that we have certain conversations. So for example, someone telling you that you can't go out in those clothes. That if someone sees you in those clothes, they're gonna think you're a slut. Particularly, this comes up with women, right? It's a very uncomfortable, horrible term, but yes, like a lot of women experience this, or people who identified as women. No girlfriend of mine is going to walk around like that. If you weren't like this, I wouldn't have to act this way. I don't like you spending so much time with your family and or those friends. They don't support our relationship. Another thing that I want to bring up, I know that a lot of this content might be triggering for some individuals, regardless whether you identify with it, whether you've had someone who's experienced this, whatever may come up for you. I just want to tell you that this is a safe space that you need to, you know, step back for a second, take a breather, do anything you need to do to take care of yourself. That is what is most important, because I know that a lot of these things are not easy to listen to. So I just wanted to put that out there. Someone can tell you, hand me your cell phone. I have to check who you're talking to. It's already 1 a.m. and you told me you were going to be back at 12:30 a.m. Where are you? Why are you lying to me? Here you come with your drama. That's not what happened. You're crazy. We don't need to use protection. I only do it with you. Don't you trust me? That's because you're sleeping with someone else. I just can't live without you. If you leave, I'll die. If you leave me, I won't stop chasing until you come back to me. Give me your passwords. Couples don't keep secret. Don't you think you should go to a gym more? You shouldn't be eating those things. You're fat. I love, and all of those different things, right? So again, all of these different experiences may or may not have been normalized for you due to your culture, your background. And you might think this is normal. To some of us, and I will speak from my experience, right? Some of these behavior have been normalized, and they have been even told like, oh, that's them taking care of you, right? They're making sure that you're making it home on time. They might be, you know, just wanting for you to be healthy. You know, they're taking care of you because other men can start saying things to you, but this is still violence. And I would also want to say that maybe some of you have said some of these things, thinking that you're doing the right thing. And again, this is not a space in which I'm trying to shame anyone. What I try to present is that this is an experience in which we can analyze our own relationships and say, okay, with what of this have I been told that it's normal? With what of these experiences or expressions have I been told that they're actually coming from love, or that it is my job as, you know, speaking from a very binary space, that as a man or as a woman, I should be doing X, Y, or Z. Okay, so which elements feed toxic relationships? And of course, there are several more, but I wanted to bring these 4 elements up. The first thing is economic inequity. The lack of access to economic resources generates a power dynamic that facilitates control. And this, again, it's not only for couples, it can also happen in families. It can also happen between employers and employees. It happens between, like, among any sort of workspace or even academic spaces. These power dynamics create a space in which someone has more power, therefore can have more control. And that creates a situation in which toxic dynamics not only can show up, but they can actually flourish in those spaces. Violent relationships in the family, especially domestic violence. One of the greatest predictors of violence is the existence of violence already in the family, either in the past or in the present. So maybe the individual who is going through a toxic relationship can identify like any sort of violence in their immediate family. So like, caretakers, like siblings if they have any, but there could be the chance that either an aunt, uncle, grandparent experience violence. And this is why it's super important when we have someone, whether it's again in our friend group, if they're arrived to like consultation with us, to the hospital or anything, and they may experience, being in a violent relationship, to ask, in a very caring way, if they have seen this dynamic in other parts of their lives. Misogyny, sexism, the dynamic where gender inequality and abuse against women, it's normalized, creates an environment of violence. Obviously, we can also include here all of the other hate experiences that marginalized populations go through. I tried to bring this up because, again, a lot of this can come up in heterosexual couples in which there are a man and a woman, but also homophobia, transphobia, racism, and all of these different elements can create a space in which toxic relationships can come up. And the last thing is the normalization of violence. In our current society, there's still an acceptance and sometimes a celebration of behavior, comments, and perspectives that are actually harmful and violent. And I think this is something very important because and especially with social media, in which there has been an incredible amount lately of videos, comments, spaces in which marginalized populations and their pain has been broadcasted. And, this can create a dynamic in which we're either burned out or we're desensitized, or different experiences in which this violence can be normalized. And I think it's something important to bring up, to know that even though this is very common, it doesn't mean that it's normal. And again, another thing, a lot of these shows normalize very, very, very toxic relationships, in which it's actually like saying like so romantic, or this whole like enemy to lovers, like arc build up. And I'm like, no, that is not how it happens. It's not as romantic as it may look like. And I just wanted to bring that up because that is also something that I can like pinpoint as something that's normalizing violence, and even celebrating or showing like this is how true love actually comes about. Like you like hate each other, you do all of these like mean things, but then you see the beauty behind each one, and that's what attracts you to the other person, because you can either save them because no one understands them like you do, or like the character has put like very specific like boundaries, and the romantic interest keeps on like trespassing those boundaries, and it's seen as romantic. And I'm like, no, that's not romantic. So yeah, definitely wanted to bring that up. Okay, so now we're transitioning as to what are some very common components of a toxic relationship. And again, some of these may be normalized by the spaces that we share, but they're still part of a toxic relationship. At the same time, and this is something that I love to bring up, is the difference between a relationship that has toxic behaviors and a toxic relationship. Because you can be in a good relationship, right, with two imperfect individuals who are just trying their best and going through their own attachment patterns, their own wounds, their own like cultural background, and they can have some of these behaviors. The difference is that both individuals are looking into ways that they like how this is not working for their well-being or for their relationship, and actively try to counteract them. These are circumstances that come up in the relationship, but they're not usually the norm. And then when we have a relationship in which these components are consistent and the relationship on itself cannot break away from those patterns, then we might be referring to a toxic relationship. And something that I also try to bring up a lot, and you'll see it, and I hope that it's consistent throughout the language in my presentation, is that I usually call, like, I say a person that experiences abuse and a person who perpetuates abuse. Because like, we're trying to shift away from this language of the bad person, the good person, the perpetrator, the victim, when again, a lot of human beings can have some of these toxic behaviors, but it is not a definition of who they are. So I'm trying to create a language in which we can hold accountable. We can hold ourselves and other people accountable for our behaviors, but that we also understand that there might be a whole story behind as to why these are coming up. Okay, so some of these different elements: jealousy. Jealousy is the excessive control and concern about who you're with, the creation of imaginary scenarios about what happens when you're alone, right? So it's not only I am concerned about where you're at, but also all of these ideas that I'm creating that is what's happening as you are away from my presence, right? The control, your partner controlled what you use, what you wear, who you talk to, where you go, at what time you need to arrive, who are your friends. Anything that looks like control can become a very toxic behavior. They also may not allow you to share your ideas, your beliefs, your values. You may have a particular path that you want to follow, and they don't want to support you on that. Nor do they allow you to be yourself, because they're trying to control how you present yourself to the world. Violence, we went a little bit through how violence can sound like, but violence in all of its aspects is harmful. Violence can be physical, can be emotional, can be economic, can be sexual, can be psychological, social, migratory, etc. Like, there are so many ways in which violence can come up. So this is why when I tell, when people come to me and again they say, oh, but my partner has never touched me, I tell them that doesn't necessarily need to be what is coming up as violence in your relationship. Another element is, the invalidation of the person. Your partner makes you believe that there is something wrong with who you are, so that you are defective as a human being. That what you believe or what you consider important is wrong, or it's not really significant, or it's ridiculous. They use, an extra S was added there. They use insults, or they invalidate you. There is also manipulation and guilt. Your partner makes comments and or threats so that you behave in the way that they want. And when you use your independence, when you set your boundaries, when you defend your position, when you try to present your needs, they make you feel guilty in one way or another. And lastly, I mentioned here lies, right? The partner gets used to telling lies about themselves or about you or the relationship, and it becomes difficult to know what really happened. And kind of what I say, it's the mix between the lies and the manipulation can come up as a term that you might see in social media or in the web called gaslighting, which is basically when a person you know, makes you believe that you're going quote unquote crazy, right? That what you said, what you experienced didn't really happen. I didn't really say it that way. I didn't really push you. I didn't really, like you, I didn't hit you. I tried to show you, I don't know, I actually tried to protect you, or I tried to teach you something. I had a friend who told me that their partner told them that they didn't make, like their partner said, I didn't make you cry, you made yourself cry. And for a moment, that person really believed that they were causing their own tears. Like, oh, I made myself cry. I didn't really have a reason why. When, you know, when they told me the event, there was a lot of evidence as to why they cried. And it was definitely a response to their partner's behaviors. So again, there are a lot of ways in which this can come up. And it's important to pay attention as to how and when they come up in a relationship. So next, I am going to show you 2 images that I think are really, really important. You will find on the bottom of each image where you can find them, where they belong to. I'm not taking credit for them, but I really appreciate for the different sources that share all of these resources to be able to see more clearly how violence can come up in relationships. And again, I am focusing a lot on romantic relationships or in partnerships, but again, this can come up in family, workspaces, you know, friendship, anything. So this is called the power and control wheel. I particularly really enjoy this resource in the sense that it makes things so clearly for some of my clients. Because again, for some people, it might be difficult to pinpoint what they experienced, because they're either have gone through it through so long, it's normalized in the family, in the culture, they've been gaslighted into thinking that this is okay. And when I show them this, they're like, yes, I definitely have seen several of these, and I've experienced several of these. So just to go very quickly through the different elements, using coercion and threats. So making and carrying out threats to do something to hurt her. This is done very in a language towards women or people who identify as women, but see this as a very gender neutral experience that could happen to anyone. Threatening to leave, to commit suicide, to report her or them to welfare, making them drop charges, making them do illegal things, using intimidation, making them afraid by using looks, actions, gestures, smashing things, destroying their property, abusing pets, displaying weapons. Again, all of these different things that maybe we cannot see so easily, but the person who experiences abuse can easily identify when the person who perpetuates the abuse is signaling that whatever they're doing, they need to stop. Whether it's flashing something, whether it's a hand gesture, like holding them very tightly by the arm or by the knee. There can be a lot by the neck, like very gently, which can look like, you know, they're actually like very lovingly touching their neck, and they're actually kind of like holding them so they can stop doing whatever they want. So again, there's so many ways in which this can come up, and it requires a while to get used to, you know, all of those warning signs in different relationships. Using emotional abuse, putting them down, making them feel bad about themselves, calling them names, making them think they're crazy, playing mind games. Using isolation, that's also something very important, the fact that they take them away from their support system. And sometimes the support system is either tired of what is going on, so they've like kind of like given up. Sometimes the support system has no idea of what is happening. They just think this person is like dropping their relationships, when it actually can be part of a very toxic dynamic in which the person who's perpetuating the abuse is making the person who's experiencing the abuse retreat from the people who can actually help them. Minimizing, denying, and blaming, making light of the abuse and not taking their concerns seriously, saying that the abuse didn't happen, shifting responsibility for abusive behavior, saying that the person actually caused it or that they earned them, earned it, or that they're trying just to like teach them how to do things. All of that is language in which they're actually what we call victim blaming. Using children. So if there are children involved, they could be making them feel guilty about the children, using the children to relay messages, using visitation to harass them, threatening them to take the children away, using male privilege, because again, that is something that it's very prevalent still, regardless of the type of relationship. Some of this may or may not come up in like LGBTQI plus couples, but it's something that still exists. So if you identify as a male, there is a very, very, very high chance that this can also come into play, or that you're in a relationship with someone who identifies as a male and it's perceived as a male by the society. So treating them like they're servants, making the big decision, asking like they're the masters of the castle, like I own this place, I am the one who is putting this roof over your head, so I make decisions. Being the one that defines what is a man's role, what is a woman's role. Using economic abuse, again, preventing them from getting or keeping a job, making them ask for money, giving them an allowance, taking the money, not letting them know about or how to have access to the family income. All of these different things are ways in which violence can come up in a relationship. And then we have what it's called the circle of violence. Again, this image, you can find where to find it at the bottom. I put on the link. But this is actually a very, very, very interesting pattern. And even though we may see it and explain it, and you will be like, oh my God, it makes absolute sense. For a person who experiences it, even though they can identify the different stages, it is very hard sometimes to break away from it, right? So the first thing is that we have the tension building, right? This is where, and it has the language of better, but let's say the person who perpetuates the abuse, right? They're moody, nitpicking, they're isolating, withdrawing affection, putting down, yelling. There might be drinking involved, drugs involved, threats, destroying property. So the big event, quote unquote, hasn't happened, but the tension in the space, in the relationship, in the home is starting to build up, right? And again, shifting a little bit the language, the person who is experiencing this abuse can try to calm the person. They're trying to be nurturing. They either become very silent or very talkative, trying to engage the person who's having the abusive behavior, just trying to stay away from the family or friend, trying to keep any kids, any like children, anyone who's in the house like quiet, agrees with the person, withdraws, tries to reason, like tries to cook for them or making them feel like extra loved, and just this feeling of like walking on eggshells. So like, what can I do to try to not, bring it to the big explosion? And then happens the actual acute explosion. So the person either starts hitting, choking, humiliating, either like imprisoning the person, use of weapon, beating, imprisonment, all of these different things. And again, just bringing this up for all of us who are here today. If for anyone this is very triggering, please do whatever you need to take care of yourself, because again, talking about this can be hard, and I just want to make sure that we all feel like we're safe enough as we go through this presentation. For the person who experiences the violence, they can try to protect themselves in any way they can. They can call the police. They can try to calm the person who's perpetuating the abuse. They try to reason with the person who's perpetuating the abuse. They leave. They can either fight back. Sometimes children can be involved in the situation, and actually, or someone in the family who tries to step to the person who's perpetuating the abuse and protect the the person who's experiencing the abuse. In a lot of heterosexual couples, it's the mom. So a lot of the children, you know, try to step in and protect the mom, and that creates a whole different dynamic as well. And then we have the honeymoon phase. And this is where, you know, a lot of people, again, get caught up in the situation. The person who does the abuse, you know, apologizes, they beg for forgiveness, they bring in big gestures of like gifts, they look for where the person is staying, shows up, tries to get the family to reason with them, tells them, I'm going to change. They may even say like, I'm starting to go to like therapy. They go to church, they go to AA. They want to have sex more frequently. They declare their love, all of these different things. And this is very, very complicated because, again, a lot of the people who experience this, you know, can get caught up in this honeymoon phase, or they can feel like this time they will actually change. It will be different, or they feel flustered by, you know, all of these different expressions and they don't know what to do. So they say, you know, this is maybe things will be different this time, but they just get so overwhelmed that they kind of like go with it and then find themselves in the circle again. And I've actually, I don't know where I read this data, but, you know, when I was doing my internship, I read that it takes, especially women, up to 7 attempts to leave a actually violent relationship. And not 7 attempts of like, you know, I'm tired of this, like I won't take it, or like I break up the relationship. It's actually, you know, trying to move on from their lives, trying to remove themselves from the home, taking the kids, looking for shelter, and they can still get drawn into this circle. And this is not to victim blame. This is not to, you know, put the responsibility on the person who experiences this, but just to show the complexity of this, like very, very, I'm trying to get the word in English, but it's escaping my mind, but it's like a very codependent, very, it's just a dynamic that really pulls you in. And again, this is coming up in a very dramatic way, but this can also come up in like toxic relationship, and there doesn't need to be violence. It can just be a way in which the person does something that makes the partner feel, you know, not respected, or it's actually scary or whatever, and then the circle continues. Or it can be in a quote unquote healthy relationship, just like experiencing like fights, or like, you know, we reach a stuck point, we try to break it, then I tell you everything's gonna be different, and then we go back into the same dynamic. Okay. And then, you know, a lot of the questions that I get as someone who works with toxic relationship are people who ask me, but why don't they just leave? Like, if they know that this is bad, if they can recognize that this is bad, why don't they just leave? And there are a lot of reasons why a person who is in this toxic relationship might not feel safe enough, or comfortable enough, or confident enough to leave the situation. First of all, it's a danger, right? Not only physical, but there are people who can like threaten the person that they'll release any sort of like pictures, you know, nudes. Revenge porn is what it's called now. So the person's actually very concerned that these pictures are gonna be leaked. Also the idea of, you know, are they gonna harm someone that I love? Are they gonna try to like hijack my job? Am I gonna be able to come back to the house and this is the only place that I have to stay? The person who perpetuates the abuse increases their threats and controls toward family, friends, pets, or even themselves, right? So either they can say like, I will kill myself if you try to do this, I will do X, Y, or Z, we'll lose everything, the kids are never gonna be able to get over this, all of these different things that the person actually gets very concerned about, with all of the reason in the world. Loneliness as well as some people, you know, might be experiencing being away from their families, or they just might be dealing with other situations in which they feel very lonely, and they believe in that moment that their strongest, more consistent support comes from the person who might be perpetuating the abuse. There's shame and fear. Shame as to, why did I put myself in this situation? How did I end up in this place? Because again, someone who experiences abuse can look so different, right? A lot of us have been sold how the image of a person who experiences abuse looks like. But I've had on my session a lot of individuals that they tell me, like, I'm successful in my job, I am successful in my career, I'm super strong, I have good friends, all of this, and I don't know how I ended in this relationship, and I can't get out of it. Or they've said several times that they're gonna leave the relationship, and they're still in it, or they go back to the person, and this creates a lot of like shame, fear of what people will say, of yourself, of your partner, of the kids, all of these different circumstances. And a sense of responsibility for the abuse that they're experiencing, or for the person that's perpetuating the abuse. I don't know what they'll do without me. I'm the only person who understands them. I'm the one, actually owns the house. So if I kick them out, they'll have nowhere to go. They'll be homeless. They'll go back to any sort of like substance abuse that they may have. A lot of different situations in which the person is, I am responsible. A lot of the relationships in which the person who perpetuates the abuse threatens to kill themselves, that also creates a lot of sense of responsibility from the person who perpetuates the abuse, who experiences the abuse, because they're like, what if they actually go through with it? Then it'll be on my conscience and on my responsibility that they did this. So it's a lot of different elements that can come up. It makes it very, very hard for the person to leave this situation. Okay, so let me just have a drink of water, because I've been going through this presentation. I kind of need to hydrate myself. I'm just like conscious of the time, and I'm like, I want to go through it all. But if it's okay with you and we go a couple of minutes over the time, and if it's all right with everyone, all of the participants, I would love to to finish the presentation and have time for Q&A, but I just want to make sure that everyone is okay with that. Okay, so I'm getting a thumbs up. I'm gonna go ahead with it. Perfect. Okay, so some of the physical impact that can have being part of a toxic relationship: difficulty sleeping, either sleeping too much, sleeping too little, waking up a lot, having nightmares, all of these different things can come up. Tension in the muscles, so neck, shoulders, lower back, hands in general, like just feeling tense all the time. A lot of like people who have experienced toxic relationship usually tell me that they have a lot of like back problems, or like their shoulders or their neck, and it's actually the tension being built up for being in a heightened state of alert during their whole waking moment, so to speak, and not being able to rest well. Problems with appetite. Some people like lose their appetite. Some other folks might actually feel like they're eating more than they're used to, and it's coming from a place of anxiety. I have a lot of clients who have some sort of like gastrointestinal issues, because since the stress really impacts the way that they, eat and how the body processes the food that they eat. So all of those are different things to be mindful of. Body aches, migraines. Some people as well, because they're always in such a heightened state of alert, their immune system drops and can be, have more experiences of like getting a cold, like getting different things. And it's actually because their immune system is consistently being bombarded by stress hormones, making it weaker and weaker. Another thing is like heart palpitations, right? So I usually, a way that I have a lot of my clients connect as to how this, when they're talking to me about their relationships, how it makes them feel, is to tell me how they're feeling their heart as they're talking to me about different things, or to just be aware of how their heart, their stomach, or their muscles react when they're around the person who's perpetuating the abuse. And that's a way in which they can get more connected with the physical cues that something is not being okay. And as you know, as a therapist, that's also that I use as a cue as to when to push a little bit forward a person when they're doing this process, when to maybe take a step back because you don't want to overwhelm them and trigger some of the experiences, whether they're currently in the relationship or they've, you know, moved away from it, but they're still trying to process it. So those are ways as to asking the clients how they're feeling or the patients how they're feeling about the situation. Some of the psychological effects that this may have is low self-esteem, you know, this overwhelming sense of unworthiness. Something's wrong with me. I've earned this. Just this sense of like, there's something wrong with who I am. Not only, you know, how the way I look, the way I function, is just like me as a human being. I'm not okay. And this is something to be very mindful of. Irritability, you know, this person can get more frustrated, they can get angrier, they can actually get like cry more frequently than they could be used to, like that you're used to seeing them cry. So all of this can come up. Distrust, this is one of the biggest things that of the psychological effects, is an issue with trusting not only the world, but themselves. When you experience trauma, it kind of creates this belief that you cannot protect yourself from danger. And when a person, you know, experiences toxic relationships, they can create these beliefs that the world is out there to get me, and I don't know how to defend myself when this comes up. Obviously, a lot of anxiety and a deep sense of sadness. And sadness, again, can come up with actual literal tears, but it can also come up with making it very difficult to get out of bed, feeling like you are no longer excited to do the things that you were usually excited about. All of these different ways, because again, we have this very, I would say, a very particular idea of how sadness looks like. When sadness it can come up very differently for individuals. So just a way to like check in with the person as to how sadness comes up for them. Okay, so I've gone through this whole presentation, and maybe some of you can say like, okay, I identified with some of this. What can I do? And of course, I cannot give you a quick recipe as to what to do and how you can get like a step-by-step out of the situation. But I would hope to give you some support as to what you can do. Something that I would love to share with you all, and I've shared in different spaces, is that I've been in relationships that can be identified as toxic. So I know how hard, obviously my experience is not everyone's experience, but I would just to say that in one way I can understand how difficult, overwhelming, confusing, shameful can be this process. And just to let you know that there can be a way of recovering from this relationship. Not saying that it's easy, not saying that, you know, everyone's process is the same, but I hope that some of this can be helpful to you if you've identified with some of this. So the first thing is to talk to someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, or a professional, because guilt and shame thrive in silence. Guilt is feeling like I've done something wrong. Shame is feeling like I am wrong. Me as a human being, I am wrong. And these two experiences build themselves on silence. In a way that we can step out of these toxic relationships is by being able to speak about what we are going through. So I really, really encourage you to find some people who you can talk to, who can support you, and who you can make sense of this experience. Watch over your safety. Of course, your physical safety is always, 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 always a priority. In some instances, it can be quote unquote easier than other circumstances. What I would say, and what I've recommended to a couple of like my clients, is that if you're able to have in a safe space a copy of your like personal documents, you know, like a Metro card or something that you can like quickly, like some taxing money, even like a very like like a burner phone that you can have to like ask for help in case your partner or the person around you has access to your phone, to have that in a space in that if you need to like step out quickly, you can do it. Something that I also go over with some of my clients, it's, you know, their own safety plan when they're home. So like, what is a room that you can lock yourself easily and keep yourself protected? Sometimes I recommend the bathroom, and it can vary depending on like the situation. Of course, recommend calling 911, identifying like nearby shelters if that's the physical safety that they're concerned. But again, what are the psychological things that you need to take care of yourself? Just different things to make sure that our safety and the safety of like the people that we know is always a priority. Clarify the needs of the relationship. And again, this, I think it's something very important, because again, if it's, you know, domestic violence or interpersonal violence, it might be sometimes a little bit difficult to clarify, to have a dialogue with both, like with the partners, to clarify what are the needs and the boundaries and all of that. But as I mentioned from the beginning, a lot of like, you know, good relationships can have some of these toxic behaviors. And I think it's important to have communication in the relationship in which we can see if we can express, this is happening. This behavior makes me feel like this. When we do this, when we have these reactions, we get stuck in this pattern that impacts our relationship in this particular way. This is something that triggers me. What are some boundaries? Do you feel comfortable with this? How can we have a conversation in which there's no name calling or no criticism? Can we look for support to learn how to do this differently? Again, it depends on the relationship, it depends on the power dynamic, it depends on the safety, but this is something that could really, really benefit your relationship. If you've said, okay, I'm not currently in a toxic relationship, but I definitely see some problematic behaviors that I would love to be able to work on. A lot of self-care. Again, when we think that we're not worthy, when we think that there's something wrong with us, when we think that we've earned this, or when we're consistently stressed, a lot of different situations, self-care can feel like we don't deserve it, or it's not accessible to us. And the thing is, like, you need a lot of self-care because this journey is hard. And self-care can be just like hydrating yourself. Self-care can be being able to sleep if you have the capacity of feeling safe and falling asleep, finding mental health resources that you can, access, support system, all of these different things, taking care of your body, taking care of your spirituality, if that's something that you identify with, all of these different things. And again, we all come from different backgrounds and different levels of privileges and all of these different things, but taking care of yourself is so important, not only if you're in a toxic relationship, but if you're recovering from one, because it's a long process, and you deserve to take care of yourself to be able to show up for yourself every single day. And lastly, have a lot of patience, because it's not easy. And sometimes we take, 3 steps forward and like 7 steps backward. Sometimes you can find yourself missing the other person, or wanting to go back, or questioning again. Or maybe if you are anything like me, coming up to your therapist each session to talk about the same thing that you've been talking for several months, and being like, oh my God, but I should be over this whole situation. Not necessarily. The mind needs to process what it needs to process in its own time. And it's important to be compassionate towards yourself as you're going through this. Now, what can I do if I have a loved one who's in a toxic relationship? First of all, don't blame the person who experiences the abuse. No one deserves violence. There's no justification for violence. And it's important that we don't fall into victim blaming the person. Not like, but like, what really did happen? Did they really say it with that intention? Like, were they drunk when they did it? It doesn't matter. Violence is violence, and it's important to call it out like that. Hold the person who perpetuates the abuse accountable. You know, I find myself in a lot of spaces as to, oh yeah, they did that, but you know, they're my friend. Oh yeah, they did that, but and it's like, we need to hold them accountable. That doesn't mean that maybe you can cut this person out of your life because of X or Y season, but to be like, to have it very clear in your mind what they did, how this is impacting people, why is it wrong, and be able to hold them accountable for that. Accompany the person while they're trying to establish their safety, you know, so asking them questions, being able to support them. Hey, you know, you brought this up and I found these resources that maybe you could look over, or, you know, there is this counseling opportunity on our center or whatever. Would you feel comfortable talking to someone about what it's going through or what you're going through? A lot of self-care for yourself, because hearing about these things, being there for other people as you're going through this journey, it's not always easy and requires a lot of patience, again, because there's a lot of back and forth that can happen. Help them find someone with whom they can process the experience with. Like, again, don't take it upon yourself to be this sole like support system, because it's not your responsibility. That's kind of like mixing the last two things. You're not responsible for anyone, even myself as a therapist, and even as doctors, you know, there is a level of responsibility that we do have over the people to come to us to, you know, for healing, for guidance, for wellness. And at the same time, there is a sense of agency and responsibility that belongs to the other person. So it's being able to support them, to guide them to different resources, and to also being able to separate or to manage our role in the situation in a way that we can also, you know, take care of ourselves and understand that we're only one person. And this is the last slide. Before I just leave you with some like resources that you can screenshot if you would like. What aspects of resilience can we develop or strengthen over these experiences? And I think this is something very important, because we're not here to talk about victims, we're here to talk about survivors. And I think that is really important to be, not to say like, oh, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Like, yes and no. We're not here to like be like, oh, you need to go through this. There's a higher, you know, knowledge behind this, and that's why this happened to you. But to be like, okay, this happened to you, and how can we make sense out of this, you know, in order for you to experience the best quality of life that you can. So some of the things that we can learn from these experiences, that we value actions over words. A lot of people can tell us that they're willing to do things, or that they, you know, feel a certain way about us, but what do their actions show us? What do their actions teach us? That we can develop a strong moral compass. We can be more attuned sometimes to, okay, what is wrong or what is right, what is fair, what is unfair. We can learn to take responsibility over our own actions. So what can I do about it? Or even as we learn about these different behaviors, again, we might not be in toxic relationships, but we can say, okay, I've definitely done that, and I can see that it's wrong. What can I do to make this different? What can I do to actively change? Apologize in instances that actually merit apology, because a lot of people who have been in toxic relationship, and this is a behavior that, again, it's very normal for people who identify as women, is to apologize for things that are actually not our fault. So we learn as to when we hurt someone and we do need to apologize, and when there are instances in which we're like, that actually does not merit an apology. Like, what I did, my boundaries, my safety is valid. To try to seek win-win situations, so it's not like me against you, but how can we make this relationship, this experience work? Because I can learn that you're not trying to hurt me. Again, not in the instance in which there's actual violence in the relationship, but outside in other different instances, you know, learning how can we support each other? Enjoying alone time, so actually we can learn that our independence, our space, our journey is valid, and it can actually be a very enriching experience. An appreciation for justice, a respect for boundaries, and an understanding of other people's insecurities, wounds, or stories. That is, for example, something that I really identify with, because going through some of these experiences. actually allows me to show up for my clients in a way that I wouldn't otherwise if I hadn't gone through this. Again, this is not to say that we can't be there for other people if we haven't gone through this, but it definitely creates a different level of compassion and empathy towards other individuals who might be going in toxic relationship. So over here, I have 3 links that you can actually access that have a plethora of resources for relationships in which there can be toxic dynamics, interpersonal violence, domestic violence, all of these different things. So I really, really encourage you to go through these resources, see what you can share, what you can identify with, what you can, kind of bring up in your own process as becoming a doctor for, again, colleagues, some of your patients, because I think that we need more people in the wellness industry that are aware of these things and can actually provide resources and support. And thank you, everyone, for your time, for granting me these extra minutes. I really, really appreciate it. And I'd love to be able to share this space with you. Of course, if any of you needs to go, totally understand. But I would love if there are any questions or comments or anything, that I can support you with to, be here with you.
Thank you so much, Alejandra, for such an amazing presentation on the topic. Thomas, can you stop the recording so we can have like a more safe space?